and welcome everyone to another MassMEDIC virtual event. I am Rachel Robinson, the Vice President at MassMEDIC, and we are so thrilled to have all of you here joining us for CSR and Sustainability 101. I have to give a huge shout out to Jennifer and Christina, our speakers today. They have been spearheading our CSR working group for the past, 9 months, 10 months, and really driving that, especially through COVID, has been a challenge, I'm sure. But they have been such exceptional partners for MassMEDIC that I have to start with a shout out to them. But you're going to get to know a lot more about them throughout this session. We do intend for this to be a series of programs, and they'll tell you a little bit more about that, but we felt it was incredibly important to start the conversation with all of you around CSR and sustainability and what that means for different types of companies. So just a few housekeeping notes before I turn it over to Jennifer and Christina. Everyone who came in should have been muted when you entered. Please make sure to leave yourself on mute just to avoid any background noise, but we absolutely welcome questions. In the chat, feel free throughout the program to pop in your thoughts, questions, comments, and then we'll have a time for Q&A at the end. We definitely want this to be interactive, so please, I encourage you to pop questions in when they come to mind, and we'll chat it all through at the end. So I believe with that, I will turn this over to Jennifer Veyu and Christina Mendoza, who are going to drive this presentation. And ladies, take it away.
Thanks, Rachel. Hi, this is Jennifer Veyu. I'm with Boston Scientific, and it has been an exciting 8 or 9 months as we gathered the membership together and reached out and asked if there were folks within the membership interested in really exploring CSR. So we've had a couple kind of working sessions, and I thought, we all thought through COVID, it might make sense to transition into a broader conversation with others through this great event platform to do a series of discussions around CSR and sustainability. So this is the first, and I'm just gonna kick off with some of the things we're going to cover today. When we finish up today, we'll give a little preview of the other 3 sessions. So we're going to talk a little bit about the components of CSR and sustainability, the concept of materiality as it relates to reporting and really understanding through stakeholder engagement what's important to companies today, especially material topics within med device. We'll talk a little bit about stakeholders and information sharing. We do a whole session on that later in one of the other workshops. And then we'll touch a little bit on getting started, the idea of kind of benchmarking, what's happening in the marketplace, places to start, and really what our peer group is doing. So Christine is going to walk us through that, and then we'll end with a quick discussion on value creation. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Christina.
Awesome. Thanks, Jennifer. Christina Mendoza from Capaccio Environmental Engineering. And just as Jennifer said, we're excited to get started and kind of lay that groundwork of CSR Sustainability 101. So with that, we can start from the beginning, start by defining sustainability and CSR and some of the common terminology that you'll hear, like sustainability, corporate citizenship, corporate social responsibility, or CSR, as you saw in the title of this program. Also environmental social governance, or ESG. And while they all do have nuances, so sustainability related a little bit more closely to sustaining the world in which our organizations exist. Corporate citizenship with more of a focus on improving community and quality of life. And corporate social responsibility, or that CSR term that we'll hear a whole lot. It's really more of a business model, enabling companies to be socially accountable to its stakeholders, which we'll cover, both inside and outside of the organization. And CSR is sometimes interchangeably used with that ESG term, that environmental social governance, but that term seems to be a little bit more prevalent in the investor world. So when we're throwing around all these acronyms and terms, that's what you'll notice. So all of these have common components. So CSR, sustainability, ESG programs, they're really more than just an environmental program, which sometimes it can get siloed into depending on what kind of conversation you're having. So they really do span topics, though, that interact with all areas of your organization. inside and outside. So it gets quite broad, because ultimately, even if you personally work in a specific functional area that you wouldn't normally associate with CSR and sustainability, or if you have a specific area of focus, investors and stakeholders, they're the ones that are really interested in that bigger picture. So they want to see this big picture. They want to see how it all ties together. And because sustainability and CSR concepts do have that reach into environmental, into social, into economic aspects, and it's all overlaid by that kind of governance, programs really have to be integrated throughout your organization and into your organizational strategy in order for it to be really effective. So a whole lot going on there. But we can break down those components a little bit further so they're somewhat less intimidating to take on. So breaking down environmental into a little bit more detail, it does reach beyond its functional area quite a bit. And we just wanted to talk through to kind of trigger some ideas of how that might take place. So there's a number of externally facing certifications like ISO 14001, the environmental standard, or building a green building to the standards of LEED certification, or meeting related sustainability development goals. They all require these inputs from the environmental world. So for example, a subtopic of materials is related to sustainable development. It's related to determining the quantities of recycled inputs or renewable materials in your products and packaging. And that requires a lot of collaboration with your supply chain logistics, purchasing, product development, and operations, investor relations for customer insights on what are their quality requirements related to those materials that you're working with. Energy definitely comes forefront to mind when you're talking about that environmental component of sustainability and CSR. There you're going to want to get your baselines. It's around a lot of that data. So baseline of where you're at, intensity of that energy use, how you're going to reduce. Are there goals there? Are there corporate goals? Are they those bigger picture standards goals? As well as understanding your energy use inside and outside of your organization. So again, that kind of beyond your functional area bubble. And you'll collect this data for internal tracking, regulatory requirements, external reporting, assessing for alternative sources. Maybe there's cost reductions, maybe there's efficiency at hand. And all of that requires you to work with facilities, site management, finance for the billing. Where are you going to find those invoices so that you can look at the details and the numbers of your energy use? And then I won't go through all of these, but just one more example, water. So again, this you'll be pulling your baseline of water usage, maybe extraction locations, reduction of that water usage, identifying what are your water intensive processes. So that requires looking into your operations and again, working with your facilities and finance for those bills, supply chain connections. Maybe your organization isn't specifically that large water user, but a component within your product or service is a large water user. So looking beyond just what you're doing within your organization. And this impact does vary by industry based on location of that source water, and considering that local community can come into play, but it does have impacts on your reputation, and that comes into marketing and investor relations and PR. And just one small example of that you may have heard of is a couple of years back, Nestle had numerous PR and legal issues related to its sourcing of water and its impact on the local community. So it can become that bigger picture. Perfect. So if we're hopping into that economic component, inclusion of the economic component in CSR, sustainability, ESG is sometimes overlooked. Sometimes people don't realize that we are considering that as well, because a sustainable organization is one that can sustain into the future. It does not have to be mutually exclusive with that kind of environmental and social perspective. There's plenty of quantitative ways to demonstrate that. And we actually will be touching on some of that value creation later on and more in depth in future sessions. Now, you could easily get the understanding that the economic component is going to heavily interact with finance and investor relations. that information within our organization's 10K financial summary form will need to be reviewed and aligned with for your CSR and sustainability reporting. So you want to make sure those are in line. And as mentioned earlier, the overlay of governance is coming into play here. So hitting on that transparent tax and anti-corruption and anti-competitive practices and disclosure. Now, one subcategory here that I do like to hit on is those indirect economic impacts. So this isn't the only thing that this subcategory encompasses, but it does require an assessment of the risks and opportunities posed by climate change. So something that you wouldn't necessarily exactly tie to economic, but climate change can have the potential to really impact your operations, your revenue, your expenditures. So seeing that bigger picture, this is now more frequently disclosed in that 10K report, that financial report, and it's being considered on its risks and opportunities. So it's kind of proof that CSR and sustainability are becoming thoroughly integrated into organizations beyond that kind of bubble functional area. So then that last component just to touch on is the social component. So there's a lot going on here, and I won't try to cover it all today, but just to give a little tidbit, it's everything from your employment practices to labor management, health and safety related to OSHA, occupational safety and health, gender equality, diversity, inclusion, huge today, supplier social assessments, again, looking beyond that organizational bubble. Now, maintaining best practices in this expansive category really takes a great deal of that cross-functional collaboration. You'll need to have close relationships with HR for that employment information and your diversity and inclusion information and programs. And maybe there's even a dedicated diversity and inclusion team, supply chain and logistics and global operations involvement to ensure that child labor practices are adhered to. Health and safety is a whole kind of beast of its own within your organization and throughout to ensure that your employees are safe. So like I said, we could really spend a whole lot more time on this, but just wanted to kind of show what it takes to successfully implement sustainability and the social aspects and the environmental and the governance for a successful sustainability program. So just that kind of baseline, I am going to pass it back off to Jennifer so she can help us understand how we're going to hone in all of these topics that I just gave that surface level baseline on.
Great, thanks, Christina. So I'm going to take that Christina kind of set us up around these broad areas of our business that do interact cross-functionally across many different work streams, but in the eyes of stakeholders, whether they're investors, your neighbor, future talent, customers, are all things that these stakeholders are expecting to know more about as people think about investing in your company, working for your company, living near your company. So kind of the landscape today is not only deciding what's material for your stakeholders, but figuring out and really adopting a framework for reporting progress on how well you're doing in these key areas. So what you have here is, and I actually put our material topics at Boston Scientific, which you can find on our website and in our performance report. And we categorize them as planet, people, and practices, pretty common. And again, I've dropped in kind of for the investor community, how they view kind of environmental, social, and governance. When it comes to materiality, whether you're with a utility company, whether you're in agriculture or med device, you'll find that the material topics are often very similar across your peer group. It's really important to understand that because stakeholders start looking at and comparing you with your peers. So, it's always good to benchmark your peers, what they're doing, where they're at with their reporting, how they're maturing, not just to be able to follow, but oftentimes, if a stakeholder is engaging with the company or a peer in a certain way, you're bound to have the same question or the kind of same expectation set of you. So, and I also dropped in some others, some other material topics that are tend to be relevant in med device, life sciences. This idea of access to care. Certainly, we're all developing products, whether pharma, med device. And what are the practices around fair pricing, access in emerging markets, making sure that therapies are available to everyone. Investors specifically want to make sure that companies are building their business responsibly and not just looking at kind of the bottom line. Human rights, certainly cybersecurity is on the rise, especially with a lot of digital health and patient wearable devices. Patient privacy is an issue, something that is of issue and of interest to stakeholders. Supplier diversity, green procurement practices, not only the practices that you have as a company, but how those extend into your supply chain. So you might be measuring your greenhouse gas emissions on scope 1 and 2, which is what you produce on site and what you buy off the market. But scope 3 is all of the emissions that come out of the supply chain. So if you're building products, you're buying components, most of your footprint really is in the creation and procurement of the components that go into your amazing devices. So companies are now having to grapple with, what is our greenhouse gas emissions as it extends into the supply chain. Certainly, I can't imagine any company, community, school, library, museum that isn't dealing with how to work through COVID, keep people safe, keep resources available, keep doors open. So worker safety and climate-related risk management, and Christina touched on climate as a real big opportunity, but something that will potentially cost money over time as either the cost of carbon goes up, and then, again, the use of carbon and energy in your supply chain is something that you as a company, as your program matures, is something that you will may choose to report on. So just a quick peek for us at Boston Scientific. Our approach combines materiality with a focus on sustainable development. And we use the United Nations definition, which is considering the environment, social, economic impacts, all the things that Christina talked about, communities and the people to achieve your needs, but also ensuring that the next generation can meet their own needs by themselves. So the idea of responsible business development is returning value to shareholders, but being mindful of the impact and the improvements you can make on society along the way. Next, and we'll talk about this in another session, is how do you report progress to stakeholders? I mean, there's a lot of ways that you can report your progress and your key performance indicators. Luckily, there's a couple widely adopted reporting frameworks. One is the Global Reporting Initiative, and that is what we have adopted, but it does allow standards which allow organizations to report impact, contributions, and practices. So if you're reporting on human rights, that reporting standard says, do you have a policy? Do you have due diligence? Is there alignment, say, to your risk or to board or to senior managers? How do you measure? What's your management approach? So it may seem like a lot, but there's a lot of resources out there to help guide you when you start putting your program together. I have a quick note over here that says, the GRI framework and other reporting frameworks really help teams develop long-term KPIs. In this case, we really started with one, our 2030 carbon neutral goal. And then our D&I team came out with 10, 20, 40 goals. If you got to hear Camille Chang-Gilmore a couple of months ago talk about D&I and how that's evolved at Boston Scientific and has helped attaining the best talent, keeping the best talent, and innovating the best products by having a diverse and inclusive workplace. But we have teams that have also come forward with a zero waste certification and a new safety incident rate. So once you decide what's material, you understand how you're going to report, teams then get a much clearer sense of, okay, what do I want to achieve? What's the timing to get there? What's my approach to get there? And am I ready to get out there and report on our progress? A quick note on reporting frameworks. ESG disclosures do inform a wide range of stakeholders about company practices. So there's two kind of pieces here. First, there's the reporting framework. The first being the Global Reporting Initiative, which we have adopted. It does provide reporting on 34 different ESG topics. There's another commonly adopted framework for reporting, which is the Sustainability Accounting Standard Board, or SASB, which tends to be more of interest to the investor community. For med device, SASB offers just 6 material topics for reporting. We did choose GRI, which provides reporting that I think is more harmonized amongst multiple stakeholders. And for us, we're looking at the SASB framework, where maybe we go in and look at where we're already reporting and pull in some of those topics from some other sectors. And then staying in that investor swim lane for just a couple more minutes, rating agencies use reporting. Rating agencies inform the investment community by using public information, outputs from your framework, and their own methodologies to develop really an opinion or a score on your ESG performance. So every rating agency has their own methodologies. Just more we'll talk about, I think, in session 3, which will be in a couple more months. And then I wanted to talk briefly about what stakeholder expectations you might be seeing in your role. And I've combined these both from the viewpoint of customers and investors. So at Boston, we're seeing both customers and investors deeply interested in quality systems. Luckily, med device is highly regulated, and we all need, anybody that's producing med device has to go through many, many regulatory steps before products become commercialized. But quality systems are of deep interest to customers and investors. That's everything from design, production, packaging, and how our quality standards extend into the supply chain. Human capital, I can't imagine any sector that doesn't have human capital as something that's of interest to clients. So everything from employee wellness, pay equity, D&I, again, investing in your human capital. Environmental practices, renewable energy generation and use, certifications and standards, product innovation, reduction of plastics and packaging, really big, especially in Europe. And then I have a number of others listed here at the bottom. I'm sure for those of you listening in, there's a lot of topics here that you are witnessing or a part of when engaging with stakeholders. Okay, wanted to give one example of how a CSR structure may come together. And this involves kind of a CSR lead, a committee, and then senior leadership. So one option is a cross-functional group, not bringing all those individuals into one kind of reporting structure. Some companies choose to have a CSR leader, and then create a cross-functional kind of council or steering committee that brings together the leaders of all those material topics that are responsible for both the strategy and performance, but the reporting. So once you get your council together, council members develop strategies for their work streams. They set KPIs and prepare for public disclosures. Within our council, we share learnings and best practices from what we're hearing on the marketplace, what we're seeing from our peers. We benchmark, we collaborate on our annual reporting, and we also work closely together for other disclosures like the S&P Corporate Sustainability Assessment. And these teams are really important for pulling together your data and your narrative for your reporting. We have a steering committee that provides oversight and sponsorship and really champions the strategy. For us, we have senior leadership that's endorsed, and we're board aligned. Again, just one example. And then I just want to end with, it doesn't end with your council. You have these teams that are really, really tied closely to your material topics and are really get into the weeds when it comes to reporting. But the journey doesn't end there. There are many other groups across the company that you will interact with in this structure, either if you're on the committee, you're in a CSR role, maybe you're in IR or communications and you're working closely with your CSR team. There's many other teams that I interact with, our investor relations team, our contracting and sales team, R&D, our government affairs organization around policy, legislative issues, and advocacy. Is there one area of strength for you at your company where you want to start to lean in and think about policy, signatory opportunities, or advocacy? You're going to want someone in your government affairs team to be closely aligned with your work. I can't say enough about governance teams. I mean, the board is there to guide organizations. Stakeholder engagement is on the rise, and those stakeholders are interested to see how engaged boards are. So I have an amazing governance team here at Boston Scientific, and rely on them often for interacting and getting support from the board. there's compliance, legal, communications, and of course, senior leadership. Because without senior leadership, it's not just the advocacy and communicating, it's also funding the journey. Okay. Now, that's a lot. I'd like to pause. I hope there's a few items in the Q&A, Rachel, for us at the end of the session. I'm going to turn it back to Christina, who's going to talk about benchmarking.
Perfect. Yes, we are aware that we're throwing a lot of information out there, but definitely we hope to have those subsequent sessions and dive deeper into specific topics. And like Jennifer said, and if you can find the chat feature, throw them at us. We're happy to discuss. But benchmarking. So a lot of baseline information we kind of just went over just to give us that general understanding as a group. But now we want to get started. How do we turn this into action? Because really it's all just information if we don't have concrete next steps forward. So a really great next step, first step forward is to determine your industry best practices and trends, your organizational strengths and weaknesses, where competitors are, where customers stand, all related to sustainability and CSR. And so you can do that by doing a sustainability CSR benchmark. So the goal with this activity is to understand where we are in relation to those key competitors, sometimes those key customers that you're working with in terms of our externally facing sustainability information. So what am I showing to the world and communicating to the world that we as an organization are doing in this field? And as with any project, you'd want to get that baseline. You want to understand your starting point. Even if you have done efforts in this field, it's great to get that baseline because you can identify opportunities. It's very hard to just kind of look at your program and try and identify where to go next. And this will give you a concrete path forward of those next steps that are going to create value add for your organization. Here, the benchmark takes the form of a gap analysis in which you end up with an assessment of your current practices, both positive and lacking. And it's really a time to be quite critical and honest because that's how you get the most out of it. So to look at the process of this benchmarking exercise on our next slide, we have laid out a couple key milestones. So I want to determine that framework. What do I care about assessing? What are the categories I'd like to review? I'll hop into that a little bit more detail in the next slide. How many other competitors or customers would I like to benchmark and who are they? Learning this sustainability information about them and where they are, what is that going to tell me and why do I want to know that? Again, what are the specific criteria that I'm going to assess? And what does that scoring process look like? I need it to be concrete and clear so that I have objective information. And all of this should be brainstormed in the context of the overall goal, which is what I want to do with this at the end to build programs getting out of this CSR communication and effort. So hitting all of these topics, there would be a graph for each of these. You're assessing specifically on each of these. But we're not going to get into the very details of that. We just wanted to give the concept of this kind of gap analysis, understanding that there's these categories and you can break it up because then in that latter half of this process, it's most effective when it's conducted by either a third party or you're really able to take a step back and understand your organization and how you're communicating for what it is, eliminating that bias. Because transparency is extremely important here. And for this concept of sustainability, it really shouldn't be overlooked, especially related to when you combine transparency and materiality, you're just being very clear on those key topics that people care about and that matter. So you may have great practices internally, you may have fantastic programs, but if you're struggling to communicate them externally, you're just hurting your sustainability message. So once it's conducted, we want to summarize those results, determine next steps, figure out what to do with this, and we can see our outcomes and next steps on the next slide. And so the outcomes from this process, you've identified your industry best practices, we've confirmed our organizational strengths, we've brought to light those industry trends so that we can see where we're at in terms of that industry best practice. And we can support efforts to enhance areas of improvement. So we have reasoning, we have backing of getting funding for this program on water disclosure or energy disclosure, like we talked about earlier. And we can show that to whoever we need to. We can communicate those results to different stakeholders. So maybe my top management or a social group externally, that we understand where we're at, and we're going to build these programs around that. We can assess the need for those programs around it by seeing where we've lined up against the rest of our competitors, the rest of our customers that we benchmarked to see if we're on par, a little bit lower, a little bit higher. And that's how we can assess and justify those next steps. So to pull this kind of together, we talked about the background, we talked about benchmarking and those specifics, kind of how to get started. And we're just giving a little bit of a teaser here on that value creation. So like, why are we doing this? It's a decent amount of effort, but there is value creation. The thing with sustainability is that it's not all one in, one out. It's not all that quantitative, immediate result that you might be used to in other aspects of the organization. And so there's a lot of intangible value add, but in order to realize that, you need to play to your organizational strengths. And that's where, if you identify your, out of all the topics you could focus on, you identify those material topics, those topics that matter to your organization and your stakeholders, focus on those, put resources there. We align and engage with what our stakeholders are looking for. Jennifer mentioned investor relations a number of times, how engaging with those stakeholders and understanding what they're looking for is so important. And then if we're able to align with our organizational drivers and communicate out as a single message, that's how we're going to realize that intangible value. And things like employee retention or attraction, or customer values and market share, workplace innovation has shown to be tied to sustainable and CSR practices. Organizational reputation, we could do a whole session on how organizations have either benefited or suffered from certain reputation components. And then differentiate yourself within your peer group. It's becoming much more of a kind of must-have program, sustainability and CSR, versus previously you could kind of have a little bit just baseline and be at the forefront. But now organizations are really taking this seriously. It's becoming that must-have program.
Great. Thanks, Christina. So I'm going to leave it on to Southern because I'm going to talk before just for a minute. So I think what's important here is many companies are already working really hard to not only increase efficiency, save money, reduce expenses, but the idea of sharing that work with stakeholders becomes really important because it says that you're mindful about your impact in your community, that you're thinking outside of your four walls, that you're not only thinking about your own talent, that you're thinking about maybe investing in a way in the community or in careers to bring up the next generation of an innovator. So whatever that it may be. And I think these points are really important employee and retention, customer values, workplace innovation are all ways to create value, but also to have that kind of single voice when you go to the market or when you're talking to those that are really wanting to interact with you more. I think too about supplier diversity. When you think about small and diverse businesses that now get to be brought up through investing in them, developing them, allowing them to be more competitive, the value that that brings to a small business or to a family or to community that may not be in the supply chain for med device. Think about the broader kind of the halo effect of working with small and diverse suppliers. I think about when companies invest in community solar, it's not just, they're working on reducing their emissions, and but they're bringing renewable energy to residential or small businesses that wouldn't have the ability to do that. I think about, for us at Boston, working with our inventory and our freight through the value chain, right? So you've got procurement, you've got inventory, you've got shipping, working with freight vendors to reduce emissions through different kinds of vehicles, or consolidating shipments to IDNs, hospital groups. There's so many opportunities to bring value, not only that benefits the environment, but certainly reduces cost to us and is a benefit to our very important customers. Two really simple examples I think for many people in this space, I spent 15 plus years in community engagement and corporate philanthropy. So I think many people moving into this space have a really deep understanding of community engagement and strategic grant making. So if you're part of that team, or if you're in this role, I can't think of a better partner than your community engagement team. So this one example is, maybe you've got a strategic grant program that works with local schools and nonprofits. It might seem kind of light, but think about youth that are now exposed to careers where maybe they weren't aware of them in the past. You get a chance for employees to be mentors or supervisors. Maybe somebody wants to be a manager someday, but they get a chance to be a mentor early on. You get to influence STEM curriculum that meets school and business needs. We partner with a technical school in Marlborough. We have a metal shop, and we really got much more knowledgeable about the opportunity to partner with vocational schools in a time where many people that work in a metal shop facility might be aging out. We really need new talent in that space for us and for the industry. You get to populate future talent pipeline, and you get to meet the growing needs for headcount for the healthcare professional. So, taking a quote from Camille, we work closely with Girls Inc., and she said, if we could get girls excited about STEM, get them thinking about achieving in math and engineering, pursuing that through college, getting into the workforce, she says, we want to invest in them, plant that seed early, and just get them into the business. And she always closes with, eventually they'll find their way to Boston Scientific. But again, that idea of really supporting communities that maybe haven't had great access to the wonderful careers we have in med device by mentorship and philanthropic investment. And another would be product innovation. If you think about developing products so that they're portable and available in different non-traditional healthcare systems, we talk a lot about emerging markets as a place maybe to grow our business through manufacturing, but are we making sure that those same therapies are available in non-traditional healthcare systems? If you're producing, say, a single-use scope where the legacy product requires reprocessing, there's opportunity for that therapy to be available on weekends or outside of an operating suite. There's certainly potential for reduced environmental footprint by avoiding reprocessing. There may be some cost, certainly cost-effective and patient efficacy that comes out of those products. And for us, working with hospitals on new waste solutions. So again, there's always value to the bottom line, but there's values to our people, there's values to society, and there's value that comes from where we do our business through that lens of value creation that Christine talked about. So that's that. And this is a slide from us. This is a slide from that we use frequently and is summarized in our annual performance report. Again, focusing on people, planet, and practices. But I think as you venture out and you think about what your company is doing, whether you're in a leadership role, you're curious, maybe you're starting to get invited to some of the activities at work around reporting. Maybe you have a young person in college and they don't know really what to pursue for their studies. I think that the idea of kind of an integrated voice around people, planet, and practices is really meaningful for business and is really not optional anymore. So by working together, we can all work on our CSR performance. And before we get to Q&A, which I hope there's a few things there, a little teaser for over the next few months. We started today with, what is it? Kind of given the context of what CSR is in med device. The next session will be getting started. How do you really start to think about doing materiality, understanding truly who your stakeholders are, their priorities, where they intersect with your goals and priorities. Part 3 will be on implementation. How do you start to build out programs? And I think for many companies, there's this sense of, oh my God, I have to build something new, or, oh, this language is all new to me. No, many of the things that we're bringing forward to stakeholders are programs and initiatives that are already in place. It's just getting the right folks around the table and coming up with the right messaging to the right audience. And lastly is telling your story. So again, reporting methods, guidelines, and then internal and external audiences. And that's that.
That's fantastic, Jennifer. Yeah, thank you. We do actually have some questions coming in. So if anyone in the chat, feel free to pop in, but I've got a couple that have come over to me. So one of the first ones is, this journey can seem a little bit daunting, especially at the beginning. For Jennifer and Christina, for both of you, as you've kind of spearheaded this internally, what has surprised you the most about the way people and your companies have reacted?
I think just baseline in terms of how people reacted, the difference between when you communicate something in a way that someone in another functional area is used to hearing versus if you're communicating it in the way that you're used to talking about it, the difference between the two can be drastic. So if you're able to kind of take the information that you want to share outside of your functional area and put it into terms of how someone else is used to hearing that information, that type of information, just the success that you can have in terms of getting them engaged, getting their buy-in, getting them on board is surprising in a good way.
Yeah, I'd have to say that in the past couple years, this space has, the amount of kind of interest, kind of the rise in impact in social investing, social impact investing, and the rise in ESG around how companies are evaluated so that investors can invest in companies that share their same values has increased significantly. I feel like it's a change management exercise. So if you are in a role where you're asked to kind of bring together a council, you're working, even if there's not a formal CSR structure at your company, it's getting folks understanding that the work that they're doing is really valuable to so many more people. You have maybe a quality system engineer, or you have compliance practitioners that are really focused on things that are kind of the nuts and bolts of your business, and all of a sudden you're at their door and they're like, what do you mean somebody wants to know about our anti-bribery policies and how we audit our channel partners and distributors around compliance? Only regulators ask that question. So I think it's being really patient. I think it's meeting those functional teams kind of where they are, doing a lot of information and kind of to get out of your program, and then just bring folks along gently, answer a lot of questions, don't overwhelm teams. And you'll find that, I find that all the teams that I work with are just excited, even if at first it seemed a little overwhelming. I think there's been great interest and excitement to be part of a broader integrated performance report, to know that during contracting with customers, some of their great performance, whether it's additional LEED certification or ISO 14001 or 50, if you can tell an environment, health and safety team that their site has a higher level of energy management, and that was really important in a contract with a customer, that really is motivation for a team.
Yeah, and I think that dovetails really nicely into the next question from the audience is, Bethany said that, she wants to push for them to monitor CSR more, i.e. number of volunteering hours, but there's some conversation and pushback internally that makes it less fun for the fun activities. And I think it goes into what you were just saying about kind of meeting people where they are and changing that mindset a bit. So anything you guys can add to that, I think would be very helpful.
Christina, yeah, anything? I mean, I just, so I'm not.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna, if you wanted to kind of dovetail into that, but I would be curious as to kind of where that pushback is coming from, because I would think that if you're tracking the numbers and they want to have more volunteering, then that just makes more opportunity for more volunteering activities. I mean, now it's a little bit hard with remote world, but I think, I mean, people like to see progress and things moving forward. So, I mean, if you're able to kind of frame it as like, we have this goal of getting to this many hours, and it should be more built into kind of the culture of, this is something that our organization does, and we volunteer and we help our community, and we would like to track it so that we can show that we are increasing this. I'm not sure if your organization has like time off or available time off for volunteering. I know some organizations do have that and really prioritize it. But I would kind of frame it as like, we would like to get to this goal. Like, this is a fantastic thing that we as an organization want to give back in this way. And even it could almost be, I don't know if a fun competition is getting away from the fun part of it, but I'm always motivated by that. So
thanks, Christina. I was just gonna, yeah, go.
Just briefly, I find that our employee resource groups, as we've amplified some of our environmental efforts, there's been some sites that have reduced plastic bottles. So it's very easy to duplicate and share some of that energy across global sites when you have a more clear path. So we really focus on opportunities. We have green teams and employee resource groups to share those opportunities, and we like hearing from them.
Mm. I think it might be because we're a pre-revenue company at the minute, but we've got about 150 employees. And I feel like a lot of the people at the business already have really tough targets to meet. And then the HR kind of got the worry that by giving another target, even if it's meant to be to do with sustainability, that they're going to feel even more pressured when it was meant to be, they're meant to have one free day a month to be able to do one of these activities.
Yeah, it seems it is, yeah, it is capital. I mean, you know, all this work oftentimes involves capital, and those are hard decisions. But if you want to really have a conversation with senior leaders around having an engaged workforce, these are the things that keep talent working for your company and excited to work for you. And if you're a smaller company, I think many, not sure that's the case with you, the idea of mergers and acquisitions, the idea of maybe being acquired by a company like Boston Scientific or another company, having all these pieces in place certainly makes a company more likely or a more viable maybe opportunity to merge when you've thought about these things, even as a small company, because the large companies are already there thinking about it, and they're thinking about what they have to provide and deliver to customers, and something to think about.
I think the only thing I would add too is I've seen, I've worked for a variety of size companies, and having different levels of volunteer activities and options in place. The most fun was when we were able to make it a team building event. And I know that's not possible for every group, but even setting up special times, where there's just 5 to 10 who are doing it together, right? And I totally echo the competition aspect, Christina, because I've worked with engineers my entire life, and there is quite a competitive drive there. So having the opportunity to work in small groups together and have, the organization suggest opportunities to do it and say, hey, we've done some research to set these things up for you. So if you'd like to volunteer at one of these events, there'll be 5 or 6 other teammates who are doing it at the same time, and we'll be able to track it very easily. And it's more fun for you to celebrate afterwards with your team. So I think those are things that worked really well for the companies that I've worked with in the past. But I absolutely understand the mentality of, I have 300 things to do. You want me to add one more to this, and then you're going to track it. So if I don't do it, it's just another piece of time that's running away. So it's a struggle for sure. We've got just a few more minutes, so I want to make sure if there's any more questions that come in from the audience, you have a chance to to ask them. I know from my perspective, I think getting into the next sessions of how you actually really do get started are incredibly interesting. This was a really great baseline. How can you, I mean, and this probably goes into the benchmarking quite a bit. It's obviously going to be very different by company size, even within the med device industry, and your role in the industry, right? So service providers versus OEMs versus suppliers. Any kind of thoughts for how to approach it at different perspectives?
I would just say without question, you need to find similar size, similar missions, similar companies, and identify your peer group, because that's how you'll be, that is the measuring stick. You can sit and say, oh my God, Microsoft most responsible, or Apple, or Clorox, or GE, or, all these companies have great kind of CSR results. I mean, they're probably a Fortune 30 company. I mean, look at their practices, look at what they're doing. It's aspirational, but more and more often, you will be compared against your peers.
And I think building on that too, in the next session, we'll get a lot more into that stakeholder assessment. That's a good starting point as well, of understanding who do I even answer to? Who cares about this? Who has an impact on my organization, and who does my organization impact? And then that, coupled with the materiality that Jennifer went through, and coupled with your peer assessments, and it's a lot of just information gathering. But I think the most overwhelming thing can be if you just throw 100 resources 100 different ways and you don't see any progress anywhere. So that's super frustrating and not at all the intention. So kind of honing in the best way you can and getting that understanding of your kind of context, I think is
the other small watch, and not so much watch out, I would say, is when we adopted the reporting framework, teams were given kind of the guidelines of what that reporting standard is and the types of metrics we were looking for. There are times when a team, and I always, it wasn't me kind of dictating where we need to go, but certainly sharing what the marketplace was saying, what we're hearing through customer engagement, what we're hearing from investors. But ultimately, the teams that have to report on these important areas of your business, they may choose some of these reporting standards would let proprietary information get out the door. So there may be reporting gaps that you embrace and say, listen, involuntary turnover rate or junior women in management is something that we're not going to report on, but you need to have a narrative and understanding and explain why there's a piece of the reporting that you're choosing to not to get to. And teams might get there over time. So I think I got the best results at Boston Scientific by, bringing everybody to the trough, so to speak, letting them see the path that we get carved out, but really letting them choose the path forward with the strategy and what they were willing to disclose, bringing their team up to speed and engaging robustly with the strategy, but keeping them bought in to the process along the way. I do feel like as you move forward and think about program development, and you think about redoing materiality maybe for the second time, if you've done it once, is really the value that the teams doing the work play in this kind of body of work, if you will.
Fantastic. I think then, if there are no more questions, we'll go ahead and end 5 minutes early. But Jennifer, Christina, thank you so much for pulling this together. It's a wealth of information and something that is really impactful for every organization that chooses to spearhead it. I think, from my perspective, it's good to remember that it is not an overnight process. This is not going to be something that you start tomorrow and all of a sudden, hey, you're the best and you're crushing it, right? This is going to be a journey. And that's why I've put together a 4-part series on this to kind of walk you through what that journey can look like for you and your team. So thank you, ladies, so much for spearheading this. This is fantastic. And thanks everyone for attending. And we look forward to talking to you again soon.
Well, you're welcome.
Thanks,
Yep.
Have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you. That was great.
Thank you.
Thanks. Very well put together. Thank you.
Awesome.